Wait, is that an ice cream cart? Did you say ice cream? Yes. Yay!
Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, it's great to meet you. I'm Stella, and I love making miniatures for my Barbie's dollhouse using mostly cardstock. In today's video, I'll show you how to make this miniature ice cream cart for your dolls, and as always, I have a free printable template to help you make your own version. You'll find all the info and the download link in the video, so now let's get started. First, we'll cut this part of the template 3 or 4 times, and I always recommend using cardstock for molded packaging because it's basically free, which never hurts, right? Plus, it's sturdy but still easy to cut. You can use a cutting machine if you have one, or just scissors and a craft knife. For small details like this hole, a awl or a hole punch works just great. We'll need to stack all these layers together so that the final piece is about 2 mm thick. We'll repeat the process to make a second panel, identical but mirrored. Then we'll cut this part, and again we'll stack 3 or 4 layers so that the final piece ends up about 2 mm thick. Next, we'll cut this part several times and we'll glue layers into 2 groups, each roughly 2 mm in thickness. Then we'll cut this part, and for this one, I suggest using a lightweight type of cardstock since it's thinner and easier to bend. We'll have to fold all these tiny tabs upwards, and I like to do this using a palette knife and a ruler. We'll attach the resulting piece to this part, which we'll first color black with a marker. We should up with all these pieces that we'll have to coat with a generous layer of acrylic gesso. This will strengthen the cardstock, and it'll also help make the surface more even in color and texture. And I suggest applying it with a sponge instead of a brush to get a cleaner finish. After that, we'll paint the entire surface in a color of our choice. Needless to say, I chose pink. And as always, I'll have the colors and all the other supplies I used for this project listed in the description if you're curious. Also, a quick tip, I only painted the front of each panel since the back will be hidden in the final structure, and I believe in working smarter, not harder. Once the paint has dried, as always, I suggest placing all the panels between 2 layers of parchment paper and then under something heavy like a big book for a few hours. This will flatten the cardstock, and the parchment paper will absorb any leftover moisture in the paint, preventing the panels from bending over time. With all the pieces ready, we can begin to assemble them in this order. Now that the base is ready, it's time to add the other parts to our little ice cream cart. We'll have to cut this part several times, and we'll stack all the layers in 4 groups, each roughly 2 mm thick. We'll set 2 of these pieces aside for now, then we'll cut this part twice and we'll glue the 4 frames on top of the 2 pieces we kept out, like this. We'll coat the panels with a layer of acrylic gesso first, and then we'll paint them with acrylic paint. Next, we'll cut this part twice and we'll glue it on top of this one, cut from lightweight cardstock, aligning them at the bottom. We'll finish it off with acrylic gesso, followed by a coat of acrylic paint. At this point, we should have these 5 pieces ready. To assemble them, we'll start by folding this part like this. Then we'll add all the rounded panels, making sure the painted sides face out. And finally, we'll carefully attach the front piece along the curved edge of the panels. We should end up with this piece, which we'll attach to the short side of our cart structure. To make the cart's handle, we'll have to cut this part multiple times, and we'll stack the layers until the whole piece is about 4 mm thick. We'll do the same for this part, which we'll have to make twice. We'll combine the 3 parts like this. And from here you can either paint the handle or, like I did, cover it with metallic cardstock for a nice chrome finish. Next, we'll cut this part, and once again I use metallic cardstock. By the way, have I ever mentioned you can often find it in food packaging? Just saying. We'll glue the 2 pieces to the front of the cart, leaving 2 mm of space from each side. And finally, we'll attach the handle to the cart this way. Next, I cut this little logo and I stacked 2 layers of cardstock and cut them all at once with my laser cutter just to save some time. But you can totally cut each layer separately and glue them together later, just like we did for the other pieces. It'll just take a bit longer, that's all. And if you're using my free template, this part might be a little tricky to cut, so I've included a printable version to save you the trouble. On the other hand, if you have a cutting machine like a Cricut, Silhouette, or an M1 Ultra like mine, you can use my digital templates, which you can find in my shop, linked in the description. I painted the logo white. Then I glued it to the front of the card, using the outer part of the template as a placement guide. Finally, I coated the entire card with a light layer of gloss varnish applied with a sponge to give it a subtle shine. Time to add some wheels to our little card. We'll start by cutting this part a few times and we'll stack the layers in 2 groups, each roughly 1 mm thick. This time I decided to use paint to give the wheel some metallic finish, but you can totally stick to cardstock if you prefer. Next we'll have to cut all these circles, and if you're using my free printable template, I totally recommend using a circle cutter for this. It's a fairly inexpensive tool and it makes cutting precise circles a lot easier. We'll stack all the circles going from the biggest to the smallest. And then we'll paint the resulting piece black. And this is totally optional, but I first added a bit of spackle to smooth out the steps between each ring. We repeat the process to make 3 more identical pieces, and at this point we should have these 6 elements ready. We'll combine them by sandwiching the 2 silver parts between the black ones like this. And then we'll paint the edge of each wheel black. Next, we'll grab a small skewer like this one and we'll cut it at a length of roughly 12 centimeters. We'll paint it black. And then we'll slide it into these holes in the card's structure. Next, we'll cut this part several times and we'll stack all the layers until we have a piece that's about 4 mm thick. We'll wrap the edge with the strip cut from metallic cardstock, and I suggest spraying it with water first so that it's a little softer. Finally, we'll top it off with this little circle. We'll repeat the process to make a second identical piece. Then we'll cut this part 3 or 4 times and stack the layers until we have a little ring that's about 2 mm thick. We'll paint it black and then repeat the process to make a second identical piece. At this point, we should have these 6 parts ready. We'll attach the little black rings to one side of the wheels. Then we'll slide the wheels on the skewer, one on each side. And finally, we'll glue the metallic parts to the ends of the skewer, securing the wheels in place. To make the smaller wheel, we'll start by cutting this part multiple times, and again we'll glue all the layers together until the final piece is roughly 5 mm thick. We'll either paint it or cover it with a layer of metallic cardstock so that it has a nice chrome finish. Then we'll cut the strip from copy paper and we'll glue it around a toothpick or a small skewer this way. Next, we'll cut this part a few times and we'll stack all the layers until we reach a thickness of 4 mm. Then we'll cut this part twice and we'll glue the layers like this. We'll attach the resulting pieces to the previous one on each side. And finally, we'll glue this part to a little cylinder we prepared earlier. Just like I did with the wheels, I used some spackle where all the parts meet to smooth out the seams. And at this point, we can paint the finished piece to give it a chrome finish. Next, we'll cut this small circle twice and we'll glue the 2 parts together. We'll cover both sides with a layer cut from metallic cardstock. Then we'll cut these little rings and we'll color them black. We'll glue the rings to the metallic part like this. And finally, we'll combine these 2 pieces together using an eye pin or a small piece of metal wire to connect them. And we can secure the wire with a dot of UV resin or even just glue. We'll slide the finished piece into this hole in the base we prepared earlier this way. And at this point, we can glue the small wheel to the bottom of the card like this. Then to start working on the card's top. First, we'll cut this part twice and we'll glue 2 layers like this. Then we'll cut this one several times and we'll stack the layers until we have a piece that's about 3 millimeters thick. We'll combine the two parts together. Then we'll cut this part 3 or 4 times and once again we'll have to stack all the layers together. The final piece should be 2 millimeters thick. We'll repeat the same process for this part, which we'll need to make twice, and for these two parts, which we'll make 3 and 4 times respectively. In the end, we should have 10 panels total, each about 2 millimeters thick, that will assemble like this. We'll glue the assembled piece to the previous one, and finally we'll paint the finished piece silver. To make the ice cream, we'll simply take a piece of aluminum foil and we'll crunch it up a little until it's roughly the same size as the little ice cream pans. Then we'll press it into one of them using a dotting tool or even just the cap of a pen to give it that nice ice creamy texture. We'll do the same for all the ice cream pans, and finally we'll paint everything with acrylics. And this is such a fun step because you can play around with different colors to mimic all kinds of ice cream flavors. I actually tried making a chocolate chip one, but I didn't love how it turned out, so I just painted over it with a different different color. To make the display case, we'll start by cutting this part out of a piece of clear plastic, and needless to say, mine comes from old packaging. Then we'll cut these little frames out of metallic cardstock and we'll glue them to both sides of the plastic layer this way. We'll repeat this step to make a second identical panel. Then we'll cut this part from clear plastic and this one twice from cardstock. And once again, we'll sandwich the plastic layer between the cardstock frames. We'll do the same for this part and for this one, which we'll have to make twice. Finally, we'll cut this frame 6 times and glue layers in pairs so we end up with 3 pieces, each roughly 1 millimeter thick. At this point, we should have all these elements ready and we'll assemble them in this order. And I found that the best glue combo for this step was UV resin and multipurpose glue. We'll glue the display case to the cardstock like this, and the doors should slide back and forth easily. At this point, we can glue the top to the rest of the card structure. Then, to make an awning, we'll cut this part 3 or 4 times and we'll stack all the layers together. Next, we'll cut this part a few times and we'll glue layers in 2 groups. We should end up with these 3 pieces, all roughly 2 millimeters thick. We'll combine them like this. Then we'll cut these parts out of copy paper and cover them completely with fabric. I decided to print my own patterns so I could add a little ice cream logo. I used the printing module on my M1 Ultra, but I believe most inkjet printers should be able to print on fabric too. And I've included the graphics in my template just in case. We'll have to glue these parts over the sides of the awning. And then we'll fold this one in half. And we'll glue it in place this way. Next, we'll need a couple of long barbecue skewers like these and we'll paint them so that they have a nice metallic finish. We'll glue the awning to one end of the skewers. And finally, we'll slide the skewers into the cardstock this way. And our miniature ice cream cart is officially open for business. Mint and chocolate, anyone? As promised, here's a link to the free printable template. And if this video put you in the mood for tiny ice cream, you'll definitely want to watch this one next. And this is all for today. Until next time, bye!